Joining us now from Osmanabad, India, is Parth M.N. He is an independent journalist based out of Mumbai. Parth, thank you for joining us. You are out in a rural part of the country. Tell us, what are you seeing on the ground there?
Well, it's one of the scariest parts here is that the fact that the coronavirus has penetrated the hinterland like it hadn't in the first wave. Yesterday, I visited a crematorium in a very small town called Ambezugai, where the workers told me that they got 5 to 6 bodies per day during the first wave. This time around, they're getting 20 bodies per day. This is the same crematorium that had 8 bodies being burned on one pyre. During the first wave, you had their highest death count was about 8 per day, 8 on a day. This time around, it has touched 32.
Health officials and global leaders are urging Indian Prime Minister Modi to enact a nationwide lockdown as newly confirmed cases of coronavirus surge across his country. India is now averaging nearly 400,000 new cases every day. The country recorded its highest single-day death toll Friday since the start of the pandemic. More than 4,000 recorded deaths nationwide. For more on this, CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay joins us now from New Delhi. Chris, since you've been reporting on the ground in New Delhi, you have shown us such heartbreaking images. Tell us what you are seeing there now, and are you seeing any indication of progress?
Well, Lana, let me tell you what I'm seeing right now. I'm on a street that would otherwise be bustling. It's a Saturday night in the middle of New Delhi. There would be street vendors. There would be people out getting food. You see none of that right now because there is a lockdown here in New Delhi. However, one epidemiologist tells me that the virus is already so rampant here that it's probably too late for a lockdown to do any good. What he's advocating is that the hinterland, the rural parts of the country, where we have no idea how far the virus is spreading, that's where we need to be imposing a lockdown right now. How did we get here? Well, let me tell you some of the things that we've seen. Some of the most heartbreaking images have been those cremations, some of them in makeshift open-air crematories like a parking lot because there's simply no more room inside of the traditional crematories. So we've seen people being ushered into these crematoriums over and over again. They're being run 24/7 right now. Some of the furnaces have actually started to melt down. These are iron furnaces, and they can no longer contain the heat. That's how rapidly and how consistently these furnaces have been burning. Hospitals are also a dreadful scene. A lot of hospitals no longer have room in them. They're having to turn patients away. And because hospitals are collapsing, patients are having to seek help in charities. We went to a Sikh temple, for instance, where they're giving people oxygen, but only in brief sips. That's because there's a shortage throughout this entire country. And finally, the vaccine is also very hard to come by. We saw people lining up outside vaccination centers, but there simply isn't enough to vaccinate all 1.4 billion people in this country fast enough. At the current rate, which is only about 3% of the country that's been fully vaccinated, it'll take another year and a half, possibly 2 years, to vaccinate everybody here.
It was only when her case attracted national media attention the local cemetery found a place for Yenny Bautista's brother, Joel. She was desperate.
We have decided to bury him in the garden in the front of my house because there's no other solution. What could I do with my dead brother in my house, with that smell?
Peru in the last 2 months has recorded more than 15,000 deaths from the COVID-19 virus. Health experts say the true figure is probably much higher. Cemeteries are overwhelmed despite doing all they can to accommodate the increased demand.
As you can see, the San Lazaro Cemetery is on the verge of collapse, which is complicated by the situation the world is in. So we're trying to adapt our tombs to mitigate this situation in our cemeteries.
But despite their best efforts, it's not enough. Not with nearly 2 million people in Peru infected and 62,000 deaths.
Unfortunately, although Peru is a rich country, my people are dying. They are buried clandestinely in the hills by just digging a hole.
Peru's underfunded health system is overwhelmed and oxygen is scarce. and a vaccination programme beset by corruption scandals, which has reached less than 2% of the population, offers little hope. Some have taken extreme measures.
I saw there were no places in the cemeteries and was worried there was nowhere to take the dead, nor money to bury them. That is my concern, and that's why I am building this, so my grave is ready.
Many regions of Latin America simply don't have the infrastructure to cope with sharp increases in COVID-19 deaths. Earlier in the pandemic, bodies were left on the streets in the Ecuadorian city of Guayaquil, and the cemeteries of the Brazilian Amazon city of Manaus overflowed. As the second wave continues to bite, dealing with the dead is again presenting a huge challenge.
Nepal's capital of Kathmandu is in lockdown, and its hospitals are struggling to cope with the surge in people infected by coronavirus.
Our emergency room had 5 beds, but now we have 25 beds. We have added 20 beds in our emergency room. Until now, we have not returned anyone from here without providing them with oxygen, but the situation is getting complicated.
Near the border with India, more workers from Nepal are arriving home from Indian cities stricken by COVID-19, and that's adding to the health crisis. Staff in hospitals are forced to turn away patients as beds and medical supplies are in short supply. And many cremation sites are filling up as families say goodbye to their loved ones from a distance. Northeast of Kathmandu, an increasing number of climbers arriving for the spring climbing season on Everest are testing positive and being evacuated.
We try not to mingle. We used to have a lot of fun at base camp and would sing and dance, but we're not doing any of that now, and we're only speaking to those in our teams.
With the coronavirus outbreak in neighbouring India growing, Nepal is suspending international flights, and travellers like Raju Rajbangshi are rushing to leave.
I'm very lucky to be able to take a flight on the last day of them operating. I'm so glad I'll be able to leave Nepal, where COVID-19 is getting really bad.
Domestic flights were also halted earlier this week, and the government has announced other measures to curb the COVID crisis. They include finding more space to store the bodies of COVID patients who've died and diverting oxygen cylinders from industrial use to hospitals. Funds are also being allocated to build oxygen plants, and lockdowns in and around Kathmandu are being extended by a week. But health experts say all this has come too late, and the Red Cross is warning that Nepal could face a worsening humanitarian catastrophe.
Cut it first. Make a vertical line.
Basic mass-produced coffins line the street. Over the course of a few weeks, this scene has become normalized. Narrow works non-stop. Orders have been flying in thick and fast ever since the arrival of the B1351 COVID variant first discovered in South Africa.
There were times where we didn't have any orders. Sometimes we had just one order a day. But during this pandemic, there have been many orders. I'm not hiding the fact that sometimes we now receive 10 orders a day. On Friday, we even had 20 of them.
To cope with the influx of patients, hotels and schools have been transformed into hospitals. In this high school, all the ill are connected to respirators. Whenever there is a power cut or overheating, these machines switch off. In mid-April, a number of people died following one such power cut. Eugene has just lost his brother-in-law when one of the machines shut down. The corpse was disinfected and placed in a coffin in the high school courtyard. Burials must take place within 24 hours to avoid contamination. Behind the sadness, Eugene is furious at what he said was an appalling level of healthcare.
The oxygen stopped suddenly. I called a nurse, but he didn't give a damn. After I implored him to come to see our relative because he was suffering a lot. What is truly sad is the negligence. When we called the staff, they said that they were still on a break. Yesterday alone, 9 people died here.
9 people died in this high school alone in a single day, but officials claim that just 6 people died across the country. The family-run funeral parlor also doubts the official figures. Every day, the hearse is cleaned before hitting the road. The business is inundated with phone calls and sometimes has to turn down customers.
We have at least 2 COVID deaths every day, but sometimes as many as 4. Before we only did Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays because according to Malagasy tradition, we do not bury people on a Tuesday or Thursday. But at the moment we are doing it every day. From Monday to Sunday, there is always a burial.
Bido Malibe is due to give birth in just a few weeks' time. But every day, she still walks up to 10 kilometers in seating temperatures to search for water.
The water problem here is really affecting everything. We spend all our days looking for water. One can't do any business to earn any income.
Finding water in this part of Ghana has always been difficult. People rely on rivers and lakes or boreholes. But with little rain now for months, it's even more of a challenge.
The farther you go, the more desperate the situation. These people have been digging for hours in the dry riverbed just to find enough water to fill a bucket to take home. In the midday sun, temperatures are around 40 degrees Celsius.
The government began building small dams across the north of Ghana in 2017 when Nana Addo became president. The project was called One Village, One Dam, with the aim of storing water for the dry season. More than 500 dams have been built, but few contain any water.
When the rains start pouring here, it pours. And some of them would just give way because the banks were not either one, properly constructed, or two, the intensity of the flow of water into those dams becomes too much for it and it gives way.
It's not just families feeling the effect. For farmers like Alhassan Husseini, it's a catastrophe. 11 out of his cows have died from thirst in recent weeks.
No grass, no water, and they're dying. One is lucky to make a few dollars if a cow is about to die, and a butcher is close by to slaughter it instantly. If the rains delay further, it will be a disaster.
The president's planning more dams, bigger ones this time, and town water systems. The infrastructure is supposed to be completed by 2023.
A long line of cars waiting to go through a roadblock outside the capital, Bogotá. For a week, the youth of the traditionally conservative farming town of Huasca have slowed the movement of people and goods to a trickle, adding their grievances to the ongoing national strike in Colombia.
What's happening here is an echo of what's happening at the national level. People woke up to the issues of wealth distribution in the country. We are demanding a different world, with a sustainable rural development, no more transnationals, no more multinationals stealing our resources. We want farmers with good living and working conditions.
Down the road, in the nearby town of La Calera, another temporary roadblock organized by local truck drivers.
We are all united. The truck drivers are supporting the protest. It's a just cause for all. We are all affected. The government says cities are running out of food because of us, but the truth is that they started this with their fiscal reform.
Since the start of the widespread and at times deadly street protests in the cities, other groups in rural and provincial areas are also demanding action on poverty, unemployment and police violence. The roadblocks have produced shortages of food and gasoline. The export of major commodities like coffee have been halted completely. The government is deploying riot police and the army to lift the barricades.
What Colombia needs today is to get back to work, to get vaccinated, to open up opportunities, and we are always open to listen to everyone and to build.
President Ivan Duque says that lifting the roadblocks is the first step to start a negotiation with the protesters, saying that they affect the rights of others. But some farmers and entrepreneurs here tell us that they support the strike despite the losses. Like Camilo Avellaneda, who owns a restaurant in town.
We live off tourism, and people have not been able to come. We had to deal with the shortages, but I stand with the protest. We want better health, pension. This is about the future of our children.
President Duque has started a national conversation with different sectors of society to try to end the demonstrations, but he has yet to meet with the leaders of the strike.
On the holiest night of Ramadan, more violence on the streets of occupied East Jerusalem. Palestinian protesters threw water bottles. Israeli security forces used stun grenades, foul-smelling, chemically laced water jets, and close-up physical force. This man was beaten on the ground in front of us and then ushered away into the night with no attempt to detain him. It wasn't an isolated incident.
So the period just before and around prayers was relatively calm here at Damascus Gate, but in the last few minutes it's erupted into another night of tension and scuffles. The worry is that another potentially violent night could ensue.
In the following hours, that potential was fulfilled. The anger here isn't just about the scenes from Al-Aqsa on Friday when stun grenades were used inside the mosque itself. It's been building over threats to forcibly evict Palestinian families from their homes in the East Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah.
People's solidarity gave us the power to continue with our peaceful resistance. All that we are asking is peaceful solidarity against our eviction. We ask any organization or governments to stand with us and help prevent the forceful evictions in Sheikh Jarrah.
We are the rightful owners. We are the owners of the land. All we want is for them to stay away. The forged papers they have do not make them the rightful owners.
It's been present since the start of the holy month, when pandemic-weary people found a major post-prayers gathering point barred off. And it's been exacerbated by interventions from the Israeli far right.
We don't have not light at the end of the tunnel, but we don't have a tunnel because there is no peace process. East Jerusalem is occupied. It's not Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem. It hasn't been recognized by the international community. So we are sitting on a volcano.
There are concerns of a further deterioration. On Monday, thousands of Jewish Israelis are set to march through the old city's Muslim quarter to mark the Israeli seizure of East Jerusalem in 1967, on the same day as a Supreme Court hearing on the Sheikh Jarrah evictions. Dangerous days ahead for a flashpoint city that can be both a focal point and a fuse for conflict within and far beyond its streets. Harry Fawcett, Al Jazeera, occupied East Jerusalem.
Mustafa Barghouti is Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative political party. He says this is the latest example of years of oppression.
What you see here is a reflection of a system of racism and discrimination against Palestinians. Not only we have been under occupation for more than 54 years, but on top of that, Israel has established a system of apartheid and racial discrimination. The vast majority of Palestinians today are prohibited from reaching Jerusalem and participating in the prayer in the mosque, as much as the Christians were also prohibited from participating in the Eastern, during Easter time, to be in the Church of Holy Sepulchre. This is a discriminatory system, and of course what you see here is protest against this discrimination. On top of that, Israel, as you have indicated, is trying to conduct ethnic cleansing in one of the major neighborhoods in Sheikh Jarrah, as much as they do that also in other neighborhoods in Jerusalem. So basically, this is the evolution of a strong struggle against racism, against apartheid, and against the occupation that has lasted longer than anybody can tolerate.
Chaos and confrontation inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound as Israeli police fire stun grenades to disperse Muslim worshippers.
At around 7:20, all of a sudden, a huge force of police attacked Muslim worshippers who were inside the mosque. It was a brutal attack on worshippers simply because the Israeli police do not want such strong presence inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque as part of their plans and schemes.
The police also fired tear gas and rubber bullets at Palestinian protesters. They say they responded after stones, bottles and fireworks were thrown at them. Al-Quds Day, also known as Jerusalem Day, falls on the last Friday of the fasting month of Ramadan. The annual event is a protest against Israel's rule of Jerusalem.
There is an attempt not only to apply time division at Al-Aqsa Mosque, but also to divide Al-Aqsa Mosque physically. This should not be done. We must work to prevent it. And the vigilantes are defending the mosque on behalf of the Arab nation and the Islamic nation.
Earlier on Friday, thousands of Muslim worshippers had answered the call from the Islamic Waqf, the trust that operates the compound under the authority of Jordan, to pray in and around Al-Aqsa. The compound is a constant point of contention in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but tensions in occupied East Jerusalem have increased in recent weeks as Palestinians have protested against Israeli restrictions on access to parts of the city during Ramadan. And there's been unrest over an Israeli court order to evict Palestinian families in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. Demonstrators tried to enter the neighborhood on Friday, but soldiers used sound bombs against the crowd and closed all entrances to the area. The United Nations has warned the forced evictions could amount to war crimes.
This is a particularly sensitive moment, and it was predictable, and especially when Israeli forces are using such violent tactics that seem, that are disproportionate, firing, percussion grenades and rubber bullets at unarmed protesters.
The US says it's deeply concerned about the heightened tensions and called on all sides to work to de-escalate them. Regional countries such as Turkey and Qatar have condemned Friday's actions by Israeli security forces as an attack on human rights.
Soldiers in the Democratic Republic of Congo patrol villages in Beni, where the armed group Allied Democratic Forces, or ADF, has killed thousands of Congolese in recent years. 2 provinces have now been placed under military rule: North Kivu, where rebels including the ADF operates, and Ituri, where ethnic militia have been fighting each other, killing civilians and displacing many more. A state of siege was declared by President Felix Tshisekedi last week. He has put the army and police in charge of administrative, court and local policing affairs. 2 generals have been appointed as governors, replacing those who were elected. Some human rights activists say they're worried that civil liberties are now at risk, and the forces, often accused of rights violations, corruption and indiscipline, could exploit this new power.
We are in uncharted territory and we know how our forces are. We are afraid they may take advantage of the situation. For example, if there is a police raid, they could loot and harass civilians, but we are also hoping to have a good relationship with them.
The security problem here has persisted for many years, with all fighting forces accused of atrocities. This is the result of the latest in a spate of killings. It's a burial of a prominent cleric, Sheikh Ali Al-Amin, who was opposed to the ADF and its interpretation of Islamic law. He was killed by gunmen during evening prayers in Beni. His widow says there was no help from the government.
They could have protected my husband when he was alive. They did not. I leave it all to God.
There have been street protests against the government and the United Nations for not doing enough to keep people safe. Tens of thousands of soldiers, including UN peacekeepers, have been deployed over the years, but they're up against more than 100 armed groups and have had little success.
We have to protect ourselves. We have complained enough to the government.
President Tshisekedi says his decision to impose a state of siege was prompted by the suffering of those living in the 2 provinces. People here say they'll wait to see if it makes a difference. But they're also worried that without checks and balances, the security forces could easily abuse their mandate.
It's been announced by the National Unity Government, and that is the parallel or shadow government of the overthrown MPs and parliamentarians who lost their places in the coup. And they are really just trying to build up this sort of message that we are the legitimate representatives and of the people, not the junta. The ongoing violence means that they are sort of announcing the creation of these units. Already in several townships and places around the country, local communities have come together with homemade weapons to sort of defend themselves against the junta. We've also know that there are many anti-junta protesters have gone to border ethnic areas to receive some degree of military training. So, you know, they're just trying to ramp up their existence and formalize this resistance to the coup on a defensive basis. Their overall goal is to create a federal army involving the ethnic groups as well. But at the moment, those ethnic insurgents really are the main military opposition to the junta. But the political opposition, you know, they also want to sort of start to create these structures. You are still seeing a number of incidents, and they are turning, there is more violence there. We're hearing of junta officials who have apparently been assassinated. There are bombs going off at sites in Yangon and other major cities that are associated with the military. We know claims of responsibility. And in these ethnic areas, there are ongoing conflicts. There's been a helicopter shot down recently in the Kachin area. So, you know, the protest movement is still very much there. And there's a big focus on the strikes as well. There is still a massive civil disobedience movement where people are just not going to work in an attempt to cripple the junta and the economy by not taking part in it.
The latest skirmishes in a deepening post-Brexit dispute as the UK sends 2 Royal Navy vessels to monitor a planned protest by French fishing boats in the waters off Jersey. Britain fears the vessels may blockade the island's main port. A self-governing dependency of the British Crown and not technically part of the UK, Jersey is closer geographically to France. Paris is accusing the UK of using red tape to limit the operations of French fishermen in breach of the Brexit deal. But London says Jersey alone is responsible for managing access to its waters. The British Prime Minister is calling for a de-escalation in tensions. In a statement, Downing Street said Boris Johnson had underlined his support for Jersey and said any blockade would be completely unjustified. He said the UK was sending 2 offshore patrol vessels to the island as a precaution. Officials in Jersey accuse France of acting disproportionately after the Maritime Minister threatened on Tuesday to cut off electricity to the island.
The Brexit agreement provides for retaliatory measures, and we are ready to use them.
A day later, France appeared to be rowing back, with a government spokesman declining to elaborate.
There is an absolute determination to ensure compliance with the agreements that we have reached with the British, and we will continue to do everything possible to ensure compliance with the agreement.
French fishermen have been complaining for weeks about the difficulties of obtaining licences to operate in British coastal waters, an issue that was one of the main sticking blocks in negotiations to reach an EU-UK trade deal that was eventually struck late last year.
A suspected cyber attack has forced a major energy pipeline in the U.S. to shut down operations. Colonial Pipeline says it learned of the attack on Friday. The Georgia-based company temporarily suspended services in order to contain the threat. Colonial Pipeline says it transports more than 100 million gallons of fuel through 5,500 miles of pipelines spanning from Texas to New Jersey. The company says it has notified law enforcement and other federal agencies. It has also hired a third-party cybersecurity firm to investigate the attack. For more on this, now I'm joined by CBS News Homeland Security and Justice reporter Nicole Skanga. Nicole, what more can you tell us about the scope of this attack? What exactly was impacted?
Yeah, well, Lana, we are still gathering details about the implications of this attack, but we know that this cyber attack has really forced the shutdown of one of the largest pipelines in the United States. It is a significant attempt to disrupt energy infrastructure within the United States. The operator of the pipeline, as you mentioned, Colonial Pipeline, said in a statement late Friday it has shut down its 5,500 miles of pipeline. And as you mentioned, that runs from the Gulf Coast all the way up to New York and feeds into several major airports on the Northeast, and it's responsible for about 45% of the East Coast fuel supply. So this is really significant. Previously, Colonial significantly shut down its gasoline and distillate lines, affecting about 40% of its distribution in 2017. During Hurricane Harvey, we saw a dramatic impact back then. There was also a massive spill in North Carolina last summer after one of Colonial's pipelines ruptured, spilling over 1 million gallons of gasoline. So we've seen some of these disruptions before, but this kind of cybersecurity hack or attack on the nation's critical infrastructure is fairly unprecedented.